Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 9 of The Agency Way, a Room 214 weekly Blab series to help marketers learn from subject matter experts within a marketing agency, in addition to guest thought leaders in business and marketing worldwide. My co-host, Erica Stutzman, is actually in DC today, so I'm already missing her. I'm Jason Cormier, the co-founder of Room 214, a digital and social media marketing agency. Our guest on the show today is Jen Casson, who heads up the creative services at Room 214. It includes the visual content marketing that comes out of the agency. In addition to leading the creative team, Jen's been instrumental in developing and running Room 214 storytelling workshops. She joined the agency nearly 5 years ago to focus on video production, but her role has expanded into so much more since then. She's worked with clients like Samsung, Horizon Organic, Verizon Wireless, Adobe. The list goes on. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's always funny with a new platform and internet access. There's inherent challenges. And about 4 minutes before we started the show, we realized the room Jen was in was having issues, and so she quickly ran to another room to make this interview happen on time. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
So we had the opportunity to talk about storytelling and marketing with Amanda McPherson just a few weeks ago, which was really cool. Former CMO of the Linux Foundation, and now she's really involved with a lot of storytelling. Today, I'd like to dive a little deeper and touch on the kinds of storytelling workshops that you've actually been running. And so to start, maybe you can just share with our audience a little bit about what's inspired you to pursue becoming an expert in storytelling?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, let me start by, before I tell you about my inspiration, I'll tell you about kind of my initial motivation. And I think it's something that's probably common to a lot of people. There's something that you love, but you're not necessarily very good at it. So I've always loved storytelling. I remember getting up in front of my first grade class and reading a story that I had written about unicorns and a knight that like save a princess. And I thought it was the best thing ever written. And I remember my teacher, when I was done, just said, "Wow, Jen, that was really long." So was not the reaction I was going for. And unfortunately, that didn't necessarily get any better as I got older. I actually really struggled with storytelling. They were usually very long still, and they were anticlimactic, and they just abruptly ended, which definitely does not make for a good story. So still like loving to tell stories and share stories and imagine stories. That's what really motivated me to start diving into, the anatomy of a story and what some of the key elements of storytelling are. So that was the initial motivation, but my kind of inspiration came later when a friend of mine recommended a book called Winning the Story Wars, which I think we've actually talked about on a Blab here before.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that book really just kind of shifted my perspective, not so much on like how to tell stories, but why storytelling is so important and the power of storytelling. So the idea that, storytelling really does have the power to shape the culture that we live in. And then put on top of that, the fact that, us as brands and advertisers and as marketers in today's society, we really are a major source of the stories that are put out there. So there's kind of this responsibility that we have to take ownership of the stories that we're telling, of how we're working with brands to really shape our culture. So I think that is what really inspires me to work with brands to not only tell their stories to build their brand, but to tell their stories in a way that has a positive impact on our culture. And that really inspires me, working with brands who want to do the same thing, talking with business leaders and entrepreneurs who are really harnessing the power of storytelling to make a positive impact.
Mm-hmm. Very, very cool. And I know that you've got a lot of companies that are now interested in storytelling. And a lot of times they're like, well, what do we do to even prepare for a workshop? And what does that workshop consist of? And so from a prerequisites perspective, do you have any insights on what you might recommend for that?
Yeah, sure. And I think it depends on a little bit of the type of workshop that you go to. I think one thing that is nice is that storytelling is something that's familiar to all of us. We've grown up with this. We have experience with storytelling. We tell our own stories. So storytelling really isn't something that's foreign to somebody like maybe marketing automation is, or, it's something that we all have quite a bit of experience with just because we are alive. So, I think that is an advantage. For our particular workshops, we do definitely start with this focus on understanding your brand and understanding your audience. So to the extent that your company has done some work around your brand ID, your purpose, your values, I think that work's really important as a starting place for at least our workshop. And then also understanding your audience. So what does your audience, what are their interests, what's important to them, what are their values? Having an understanding of both those two things is really how you start to create authentic and meaningful stories. So we've definitely worked with some companies who have done a lot of that work, and we definitely kind of bring that into our storytelling workshops. And then we've had other companies who maybe haven't done as much work around there, or who are in the midst of it, or who are going through a rebrand. So I still think they'll get value. They do still get value out of the workshops, but sometimes they'll have a little bit more work to do after the workshop to go back and maybe get on the same page with their internal teams and their internal leadership with, what do we really stand for? What is our target audience, and what do they truly value? Mm-hmm. So I think just kind of, if I were a marketer looking to go to a storytelling workshop, one such as ours, just trying to get on the same page with my internal team with some of those like core values and core audiences.
Yeah. Yep. Makes a lot of sense. If people are interested, and I'll just tell you, even the brief conversations I've had in meetings with clients, I'll bring up just the phrase storytelling workshop, and I see people, they perk up, they lean in. But, obviously there are people that they just can't make it to these workshops for whatever reason. And so for those that are interested in the benefits of a workshop, and even just people who will see this Blab, for those that are interested in the benefits of what the workshop has to offer, but can't actually attend, do you have any practical tips or resources that they might apply? Yeah,
I definitely have some tips, I think, and some resources. I do think part of it is just kind of shifting your mentality a little bit. So just anywhere in your business where you might be trying to convey information, just be thinking about, how could this information be packaged up into a story? Because when you do that, it's going to be received so much better. People remember it. It'll resonate with people if you package that into a story versus just putting it on a PowerPoint slide. And there's tons of science, behind this and why that works, which I won't go into here. So I think part of it is just an awareness. Maybe you're going to go do a presentation, or maybe you're going to even like communicate a process or a new idea or something. Just maybe take a moment and say, okay, I've always done it this way, PowerPoint slide or whatever. How could I maybe put this into a story? So I think that's a good place to just start, is just that awareness of some opportunities to maybe introduce storytelling. And then once you know what some of those opportunities are, actually crafting a story can be hard work. But I do think there's one kind of structure that we use both in our storytelling workshops and in other applications that is just a nice, simple guide to help people craft a story, to have a story arc. And that's the STAR model, STAR. So S standing for situation. So that's kind of like your backstory. Who are your characters? What is kind of the opening situation? And then the trouble. So every good story has some conflict, right? So like that's the piece where you introduce that conflict. What is the trouble that your hero, maybe it's you, maybe it's one of your customers. What's the trouble that your hero is facing? And then the A is basically the actions that your hero is taking. So we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this. So that's the A. And then the R is the results. So what then happened after that as a result? How has your hero kind of been transformed on their journey? What is something new that they learned, or improvements that they made, or how is their life better because of these actions that they've taken or things that they've learned? So that STAR model, I think, is helpful when just for someone who maybe doesn't do a lot of writing or doesn't do a lot of storytelling. It's just a nice, simple model to take information and try to package it into a story. So that I think is a very practical tip. I find myself using that kind of model often, at least to get started with a story. And then from there, I do think there's some books that I definitely kind of have on my bookshelf that I refer to a lot. One of them I already mentioned, Winning the Story Wars by Jonah Sachs. There's another book, it's relatively new. It's called The Circle of the Nine Muses by David Hutchins. And his book actually has a ton of practical tips and exercises. What I love about his book is that it's not just storytelling to help, promote your product or service. It talks about how storytelling can be used in developing your strategy or for innovation or for culture building, which are all fantastic applications of ways that storytelling can be used. So that's really helpful. And then let me grab one other thing here that I have. So if anybody's ever seen these story cubes, these are just a fun little way to introduce a storytelling mentality into your organization. So they actually have a few different sets. You can find these online. They're called Rory's, R-O-R-Y, apostrophe S, story cubes. And they have a few different kinds, but they are these dice, and they have different pictures on them. And, let's say you're starting a meeting. You just break out these dice, and before everyone gets into like their meeting mode, you just pass these around. And this is what we do at Room 214 at times. Everyone gets a dice, they roll it, and whatever picture comes up, they have to start a story around it. And then you just kind of go around and do, kind of a group story, building off one another's dice and building off the dice that you roll. So it's just a fun way to just play with storytelling. And it's kind of a non-threatening, low pressure way to just tell a story that may, make no sense and may have a terrible ending, but just getting into kind of that story mentality. So the story cubes are definitely something that we use at work, that I use at home with my 6-year-old son. And it's just, it's a fun way to get that part of your mind working in kind of a story mode.
Sure. Yeah. It's great information. I'm glad you had something like that to share with people. I think, you've mentioned so many things that come to mind. When we consider lessons learned, I think one thing is, one lesson we've learned collectively really is that storytelling goes far beyond just marketing. And so how that drives a culture, a brand, that's, and it's funny because it's sitting in these workshops, going through the process, you start to really understand, oh, wow, this is much more than, how do we come up with a creative campaign that's just based on a story? Mm-hmm. So that's really cool. Another thing, and I know you didn't mention this, but there is a science to storytelling that makes it have an impact. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what that is and share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. I definitely would consider myself, a neuroscientist, but there's a ton of research out there that is showing the effects that storytelling has on the brain. And we truly are wired as human beings to process stories differently. There's studies that show, if you take the same, information and you put into a PowerPoint presentation and someone is kind of reading these bullet points off to you, brain activity shows that there's a very specific portion of the brain that will light up, and it's usually around language processing. And it's just kind of the specific one area. You take that same information, you package it in a story, and you tell a story, and it activates so much more of the brain. And one of the things that they're showing that is really important for effective communication. And then there's also something else called neural coupling. And what that is, in kind of layman's terms, is when I tell you a story, your mind is being activated in a very similar pattern that my mind is being activated. And, you might even go, I don't know if scientists would necessarily say this, but you might go as far to say like that might look like empathy. Even though you might not have been in my story or the exact same situation, there's likely something there that we're connecting on. You've had a similar experience, or you've kind of at least imagined what that experience might be like. So that ability to really kind of communicate and connect with people through storytelling, definitely there's a ton of science around why, brain science just shows it's a more effective way to communicate. People retain information more that way. And it's just, it makes information much more meaningful and relevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something else you mentioned too that I'd like to touch on is the language you used. You talked a little bit about the hero, and I mean, a common mistake that we see in branded content and content marketing in general is that companies by default just want to talk about themselves, and all the content they're producing, it's like a disease. They can't help themselves. I'm always talking about my features, my products, my services, whatever. But there's this whole concept around the hero and where the brand, who that hero is and what the brand's role is in that. Maybe you can just share a little bit about what you know with that.
Yeah, sure. And The Story of Wars is definitely a great book as well that touches a lot on this. But the idea of, shifting the hero from being your company or your product and service to your actual customer, really putting them at the center of your story, and then showing how your brand or service helps that hero along their journey. I think part of what Room 214 does is a lot of kind of consumer research, coming up with personas, understanding the customer journey. So I find that part of storytelling really interesting as well. It's once you kind of have a good understanding of who your audience is, and then that journey or some of their kind of stories, you can start to insert your company's product or service into their journey and show how you can be helpful to help them, achieve whatever they're trying to achieve or overcome, whatever challenge they're trying to overcome. So really setting the brand as more of a mentor or a guide instead of the hero in your story. That's not to say, I do think there are times when your brand would be the hero of your story. For example, if we're telling the origin story of Room 214, that is probably an appropriate time that the company, but it's probably going to be more, yourself, Jason or James as the heroes of that story. So there are certain times where it does make sense for your company or brand to be the hero. But I would say, when you're speaking to, customers, for the most part, I think they want to see themselves in the story, not just be hearing about your product or service. It just starts to feel too much like I'm being sold something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we're getting close to our 20-minute mark here. Jen, would you have any particular insight or advice or something you would want to share with the audience about the value of storytelling, or maybe how they should be looking at it? Anything that comes to mind?
I think it just goes back to as marketers and, as brands, we are putting the stories that we put out into the world are shaping the culture and the society that we live in. And again, I find that very inspirational. I think just having that awareness and trying to work with, your brand or your clients to, tell empowering stories that have a positive impact instead of kind of feeding on particular fears or stereotypes. There's a lot of great examples out there, around empowered women or empowered men or empowered children, just good stories that really need to be told. And those stories always have a way of kind of cutting through the noise and the clutter.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it. Our book recommendation of the week, this is something that Erica normally does, and I'm missing her, like I said. This is a pretty obscure one. I'm betting a lot of you have not heard of this. This is called A Lapsed Anarchist's Approach to Being a Better Leader. So definitely check that out if leadership is something that you are interested in or involved with. Our shout out of the week for the nonprofit arena this time, I'm going to double dip here. And I just want to give props to everydayhero.com. Again, for those of you who may not have seen the show last week, this is a technology platform used to help nonprofits essentially enable individual donors. And then those donors can leverage their social networks to reach more people and ultimately do fundraising for the nonprofit of their choice. So super cool platform. Check it out if you get a chance, everydayhero.com. And then our quote of the week is coming from Bono. When you truly accept that those children in some far off place in the global village have the same values as you in God's eyes, or even in just your eyes, then your life is forever changed. you see something that you can't unsee. So on that note, we will sign off. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today. As a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter at room_214. You can also subscribe to our email newsletter by going to room214.com/blog. Our weekly series continues 11:30 a.m. every Thursday. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on another episode of The Agency Way.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Jen. See you next time.
Bye.